Yep, recording.
Hello and welcome to today's presentation and talk on radon gas. My name is Joy and I'm the programmer here at Sundre Library, and with me is John Horning, who I'm going to introduce shortly. We're talking about radon gas today. Radon gas is an odorless and invisible gas that naturally occurs in the environment. It enters all buildings that come in contact with the ground, and it can move throughout the buildings. Radon gas is higher in certain geographies, and we know that central Alberta is one area that shares these geographical components. So if you live in central Alberta, there's a very good chance that you have high radon or very high radon. The great news is that testing is easy and free. So to talk more with us about radon is John Horning. John worked in the energy business for approximately 40 years as a geologist and executive, and then worked as a diligence and technical consultant in various companies. For the past 10 years, he's worked within the home construction industry and served on the Inner City Advisory Council for the Canadian Home Builders Association. He's been interested in radon in homes since 2015, converting his consulting business to radon testing and mitigation company. Last few years, his focus has been on the relationship between geology and radon in Western Canada. We are so happy to have you joining us, John, and hopefully you're going to tell us a lot more about radon and what we can do about it.
Indeed, I will. Thank you, Joy, for that introduction. So we're going to talk about radon in probably two different presentations. Part one will be about radon and testing and what all your questions about radon generally, and then part two will be much later in the year after people have done some testing. You may wonder how you get rid of this stuff and whether a mitigation is in order or not. So for today, though, we'll focus on just the subject of radon and why it's in your area. So if I could have the first slide, Joy. So today we'll talk about radon, the health risks associated with it, whether it's in your specific area, and if it is in your area, what can be done about it. Next slide, Joy. Slide.
Working on it. Got a little bit of a glitch here. All righty, let's see if we can get this thing moving across. Oh, my computer's frozen. Oh.
There we are.
There we go.
There we go. So radon is a naturally occurring radioactive gas. It's odorless, it's invisible, you can't hear it coming, it's just there hiding in your basement. And it's caused by the decay of uranium and more specifically radium, both radioactive minerals. Uranium has a half-life of 4.5 billion years, and every day is making new radium. And radium has a half-life of 1,600 years, and every day is making new radon. Radon has a half-life of 3.8 days, so if it gets into your house within about 2 weeks, that particular molecule is gone, but there's new ones coming in every day. And in Canada, in Alberta specifically, 1 out of every 6 homes in Calgary, for instance, have elevated levels. And you can never have too little radon, but some houses just have way too much. In fact, the University of Calgary studies by a group assigned to study the effects of radon in lung cancer determined that the prairies, Saskatchewan and Alberta, have the second highest radon exposed population on Earth. And for interest's sake, Poland is the highest this year. Next slide, Joy. Can you?
Our tech is not cooperating this morning. Come on, there we go.
Okay. So lung cancer risks. The single health risk arising from radon is lung cancer. Long-term exposure is very damaging, especially to children whose lungs are not as well developed as adults. It takes about 20 years for children to develop that tougher lung tissue. And radon is the second highest cause of lung cancer deaths worldwide after smoking, which is still the first. In Canada, about 3,300 deaths per year are attributed to lung cancer from radon-related sources. And the hell of it is, it's all preventable. If you go back just one step, Joy, there. So the way it affects you is you breathe in the radon, it goes through a radioactive decay, throws off an alpha particle which damages your lung tissue all the way down to the DNA. So past below the cell structure, all the way down to the DNA. Damage to your DNA causes mutation as the lungs try to rebuild that tissue, and eventually that leads to a cancerous growth. Okay, next slide. So in Alberta, we have we've mapped three relative radon hazards, guarded, elevated, and high, and the dark red stuff is the high. And this is radon potential. So it's not a direct measurement of radon. The only way we can do that is for you to test your house. However, we can estimate it from the amount of radium and uranium in the soils. And we've done so since about the 1970s. You can see in the inset, there's a map of Canada, and you can see that a good chunk of Alberta and about half of Saskatchewan has very high radon potential. Noteworthy that radon or uranium staking mining companies have staked a good chunk of Alberta from time to time looking for uranium, and the highest uranium reserves by purity and by volume are found in northwest Saskatchewan. So it's not as if we don't have a lot of uranium in this country. We do. Next slide, Joy. So where's the radon found? It's in your home, any home, any building, in fact, touching the ground, including schools, daycares, workplaces, and your home have these radon gases found in them. The fact that we live in a cold climate and we have warming air in our houses rising and sort of acting like a slow vacuum on the concrete floors helps to pull it in. New homes, because of their energy efficiency, they're a pretty efficient bag, may contain higher levels than older homes by as much as 30%. And since 2015, well, 2010 nationally, but 2015 in Alberta, new homes must have a radon rough-in. And builders have been trying to get that right ever since, and many are still failing to do it properly. I might say as well that 43% of Canadians' exposure to radiation comes in the form of radon. And 95% of that radon exposure comes from indoor air. So it's a very serious problem. Go ahead to the next slide, Joy. It gets in to your home or to buildings through exposed soil or rock and crawl spaces on the top left-hand corner of this slide, down towards the center of the slide, through the floor or wall joints where the concrete floor meets the concrete wall of the foundation. That's called a cold joint. Through floor drains and sumps. And I don't see that much happening in the way of floor drains, but I do see an awful lot of sumps that need to be sealed to properly keep the radon from flowing in. It's part of the building code now that you must have a sealed sump cover. And finally, cracks or flaws in the concrete floor itself will allow radon to flow in. And it likes to do that because the pressure outside the house is higher than inside the house. And so it pushes the gas along very easily. Next slide, Joy. Testing is the only way to know if your home is safe. And so how do you test? Well, you could hire a certified tester who will drive out, put a test unit in your home, and send it to the lab when it's finished. You can get a DIY test. You can buy them from the U of C, the Evict Radon campaign. They're about $70, $65. through the Lung Association or Take Action on Radon, which is a national campaign to get people to test their homes. And the cost there is going to be $40 to $60, including postage. You can go to your local library if you live in Sundre or anywhere in the Parkland library system and borrow a device that looks like this and take it home and try it for a week or so, just to reaffirm the idea that you do have radon in your home. These devices are made specifically to find radon, and they're very effective at doing it. You can also take part in the Radon 100 Test Challenge. And this little plastic hockey puck, which is vacuum sealed, gets sent to your home, or you drive into town and pick it up at the library. You put it on a shelf for 3 months. You return it to the library and they mail it away to the lab. These tests are absolutely free through the Canadian Association of Radon Scientists and Health Canada and the Lung Association. But you have to go to your library to get one. It's a free program for certain communities in Canada, those that volunteer to take part in it. And testing, again, is the only way to know if your home is safe. So we urge you to do that. Next slide, Joy. So once you've tested, you'll get a number back. You'll get a report sent directly to you. And it's your information, so it won't be shared with anybody else, except scientists who are only concerned with your postal code and your absolute number. So you'll get a number back, and it'll be anywhere between, well, outdoor air is 10 to 30, so it's going to be at the lowest somewhere in that range to a couple of thousand. Actually, I've done houses that were a couple of thousand or more. But the exposures that are recommended by various health organizations around the world include the World Health Organization reference number of 100 becks or becquerels. The US EPA's number is 148, and in Health Canada says we shouldn't be experiencing radon at levels exceeding 200 becquerels in Canada. Everybody has their own scientists, their own scientific community, and their own analysis as to what is safe. There are no safe levels, but what's tolerable or what's acceptable is set by each country. But those are the three basic big norms. A becquerel, in case you're wondering, a becquerel per cubic meter is a single radioactive decay per second per cubic meter of air. If you think about that for a minute, you're walking around your house, you're breathing in and out. And because your house has radon in it, we don't know yet what concentration, but let's say it's at that 200 level. That means that every time you breathe in, you're breathing in a gas which has a radioactive decay, 200 radioactive decays per second, and you're breathing it back out again. If you breathe it in and breathe it out without any radioactive decay, nothing happens. If you breathe in and it goes through a radioactive decay or a couple of hundred decays, your lung tissue will be bombarded with these particles. And at low doses, your lung tissue can repair itself and you'll be fine. At high doses, the amount of damage that is caused by these alpha particles, this radiation that comes off, is so great that as your lungs try to repair themselves, you get this wild accelerated cell growth, and that transmits to cancer. So let's not do that. Let's get tested and see exactly where we are. And the good news is if you have high levels, it can be fixed. Next slide, Joy. So why here? That answers two questions. Why am I here? And why is the radon here? I'm here because I've been testing foothills homes and acreages for, well, the last 3 years or so, in addition to all over the province. But the foothills ones are interesting because they're so damn high. I find high radon values over a broad area, and that is statistically unique. In fact, it's kind of statistically impossible. If I test a street full of houses in Calgary, I might get 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 6 that's considered high, and the rest of them would be considered quite low and quite safe. In the foothills and in areas that I've been testing, I've been seeing 1-on-1. So in other words, every home I test is high, and over a broad area. If I get 1 or 2 per block in a city, that's probably about normal. But if I get a high test on every test I do, that's extremely abnormal and says there's either a lot of radon in the area or something else is going on. Geological setting, I've determined, is the key. And so when we talk about the geology, we're really looking at a number of factors. Let's go to the next slide, Joy. And in order to have radon in your home, you need a nearby radiation source, and you need a pathway for the radon to get to your home. Some geological settings relate to very high radon rates in homes. And by studying these, we hope to be able to determine which houses may be at risk even before they're tested. It costs billions of dollars for all of these scientific tests, overflights, measurements of uranium in soil, drilling of the soil and testing of it. And over the last 40 years, we've been doing that, especially in the States. And we've determined some models that seem to work quite well. And in Europe, in some countries, they have very good models. They won't even allow you to build a house without a radon test or without putting in place radon mitigation measures before the house is even built. We're not there yet in Canada, but we're certainly, with the building code changes, we're certainly moving towards that. We've looked at some areas where they've had radon issues for the last 30 or 40 years and done very detailed studies over the last 20, and that's helped us develop some models for Canada as well. Let's go to the next slide, Joy. So this is Mike Keto. What a guy. Mike, as a young man, obtained a PhD in nuclear environmental chemistry in the early 80s. He spent his entire life, he just retired this year, he spent his entire life working on the issue of radon in homes and radon related to geology. And he spent a lot of time collecting samples of radon in soils and uranium in those soils in New York State. That's a map of New York State behind him. I won't read his whole bio. You can't actually get it on 2 or 3 slides, but I've really shortened it up there. But he's probably one of the better scientists in the US at this sort of thing, and there's a bunch of them, as there are in Canada. And New York State is rather interesting because it's quite like Alberta, and I know that sounds strange, but it's true. Let's go to the next slide, Joy. So here's a map of New York State. In the prairies, our research team out of the University of Calgary has probably tested about 12,000 homes, and a lot of that in a couple of the bigger cities. In New York State, which is 1/5 the size of Alberta, they had tested just through the EPA, or through the New York State of Health rather, 120,000 tests. Each state has its own testing setups, and so that number is probably 3 times that large when you get all the various agencies involved. What this map shows is that there are low potential zones for radon and some very high ones. And about the southern half of the state has the very high numbers. And we are not, well, we know what causes that. And if we go to the next slide, you'll start to see it. So I've highlighted New York State on this slide in green off the right-hand side of the slide there. And you see the upper tier states, just as you saw Alberta and southern Saskatchewan, very high in radon. And these northern tier states are very high in radon for almost the same reason. Just to give you an idea of the scale here, the high numbers are 4 4 picocuries per liter, which is the US measurement. And that equates to about the 148 becquerel mark. So all those northern tier states are quite high in radon. Next slide, Joy. This slide shows the southern limit of the most recent glacial period. So the glaciers advanced from Canada down into the northern tier states and then stopped about where that red line is. You can see New York State highlighted in yellow there. And what we've determined is that all of the material that was ground up and brought across Canada and down into the States had a lot to do with redistribution of radioactive material and material that easily allows radon to flow through it. If we have the next slide, Joy. So when a glacier stops moving and starts to melt, and they melt backwards towards their source, it's called downwasting. They leave behind a jumble of material, everything from sand to clay to bedrock to whatever they've ground up in their path and carried along beneath the glacier or pushed ahead of it. Think of it as a bulldozer with with a blade that's maybe 2 miles high, because most of Canada was covered in ice, at least a couple of miles thick. And that all got pushed across Canada, mixed with all of the local rock, and then in some cases pushed down into the States. And that word, moraine, is typical of all of the material that you find associated with a glacier. It's all of those clays, sands, gravel, huge house-sized rocks, everything. It's all lumped together and called moraine. So as the glacier melts, it forms this huge glacial lake, and eventually behind that, towards Canada, you have the ice lobe. These glacial lakes, by the way, were huge. They were 1,000 or 2,000 feet deep. They ran for hundreds of miles, and there were lots of them. And as the glaciers melted and continued to fill the lakes, and the rain and snow acted on the moraine itself, it tended to carry away the finer materials, the silts and the sands and that sort of thing, and left behind a lot of these gravels. And it's those gravels that have the focus of our attention. Next slide, Joy. So the outwash gravels, the material that's pulled away from the moraine and leaving behind the gravels, this black outline here is, again, the state of New York. And you can see all kinds of wiggly lines on there, which indicate ice edges at various stages of melting. But you see some solid white areas. It looks like paint on the slide. Those are actually glacial moraines, these stacks of sediment from which the fine material was washed away and left behind gravels. And then in the middle of the slide, you see A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and little circles around them. And off on the right-hand side of the slide, you see towns. And each letter corresponds to a number of towns, each of which had in the living area, not the basement, so the main floor, a radon level of 148 becquerels or higher. And you can see, well, you can't quite see it because our pictures are in the way here, but every one of these had 50% or more. All 15 of these towns, these are the top 15 in New York State, all 15 of these towns had every other house basically on the block had high radon rates. And that led to the next slide, Joey. That led Mike to come up with, and his team to come up with radon studies down to the county level, or 62 counties in New York State. And then within those counties, there are dozens of towns. And so just on a county basis, this particular slide shows increasing amounts of gravel in the soil from left to right. So it starts at 10 and goes to 70. And then how that relates to the increasing radon found in these homes. And it goes from 1 to up to 5. And these are picocuries per liter. So remember that 4 picocurie is about the EPA limit. If you were looking at the Canadian side, the conversion is 37 becquerels for every picocurie. So if you're talking our number in Canada is 200 becks, it's about 5.4 picocuries. So the point with this slide, though, is that as you increase the amount of gravel in the soils, you increase the amount of radon that seems to find its way into people's homes. Next slide, Joy. And so Mike made the simple assessment that if you've got gravel, and this is some guy's backyard in New York State, but if you've got gravel, then you've got radon. And that holds that the radiation levels in the soils are going to be about the same. And when we combine those radiation levels with the easy travel ways through the gravel, you're going to have some pretty high radon rates as well. So that's New York State. And if we look at one in central Alberta, this is just outside Sundre, those folks have gravel too. This is much higher than 70%. That's all gravel. That's what we would call a dirty gravel, but it's gravel nonetheless. And this is some guy's footings that he poured before he built his house. I tested that house, and or the owner did, good for him, and found a high level. And we were fortunate enough to be able to get in there and to mitigate that home and get it down to a reasonable level. I think it went from 700 to about 70. So that's the kind of results you can get with the mitigation. But the point here is if you've got gravel, you're going to probably have radon. And if we look at the next slide, Joy, this is a geological map that I did, a surficial or a surface geological map. And it, I don't know if Joy, if you can move your pointer to where that Sundre is, maybe to where, yeah, there's Tim Hortons corner right there. So that big red blob there is clean gravel. And that's about 5 square miles of it. And the town of Sundre is built right on that. This whole map has glacial overtones. In other words, every color and every line on this map speaks to its history as having been glaciated. The general colors, the reds and the pinks and even some of the grays and browns are all relative to the gravel. There's a bit of a legend on the side there. And it sort of transitions from pure gravel to pure sand. But the point is, everything on this map, all these little lines show glacial directions or movement of glaciers. It shows ridges caused by glaciers. It shows stream channels from major meltwater. This legend is on the left-hand side of the slide, but major meltwater channels as the glacier melted and as the glacial lake drained. And yes, it was a glacial lake here, which extended from Sundre all the way down to Calgary. So a pretty long one and a pretty deep one, and it sat there for about 1,000 years. So the glaciers had a lot of time to build these beautiful gravel pathways. And the result of that is if you go from Sundre out to, say, Highway 2, which is just to the right of that green label that says got gravel, yeah, that's Highway 2. So you basically encompass the areas of Sundre, Olds, Didsbury, Carstairs, and even further south, Crossfield, and eventually you get to Calgary. And Calgary's not too bad. It's about, as I said, about 1 in 6 homes has high radon counts. But as you move to the west towards Cochrane, you get down to about 1 in 4. Now, when I say that, it doesn't mean that every house is going to have high numbers, because you can, even in the highest count areas, you can still have houses that have very low numbers. And it's not uncommon, if I'm doing 2 houses on a block, that one will be, I'm thinking of a specific example here, 1,000 becquerels, and the house next door might be 50. So house operation has something to do with it, but generally houses in cold weather climates are built about the same, so they tend to act in the same manner. And it's relatively easy to get a test on these things. We recommend long-term tests only. The tests available from the library, these guys, are sniffer tests only, and they're just there to verify that, yes, you do have radon, but the numbers need to be averaged because of daily variations in the radon rate, need to be averaged over at least 3 months, and that's why you need this alpha track tester, which has no moving parts, by the way. It's totally benign. Set it on your shelf and forget about it until it's time to send it away, and it'll do the work for you. And if we go to the next slide, Joy, I want to just emphasize some takeaways here. This is a high radon risk area. Your home, your work, your daycares and schools could have high levels. And the only way to know is to test. The testing period is generally between October and March. I would love to know the results of that test, but you are not obligated to share it with me, or there's no legal requirement for you to share that information. I know the karst people would also like to know, just because every test we have replaces that $1 billion that we need to spend to do all that geologic testing. And it's the best number we have if you have a direct test. And if you have a high radon concentration, it can be fixed for a reasonable price. Next slide, Joy. How you can help. So test your home, share the results with me or with somebody. Tell your friends and neighbors, ask them to test. They will thank you. And lastly, make sure that you get a chance to participate in the 100 Test Challenge through karst. The Sundre Municipal Library is coordinating the program. You all owe a huge debt of gratitude to Joy and Karen there. And these tests are free for up to 100 community members, so please take advantage of this. It's a tremendous gift to the area, and it's a very minor commitment of your personal time to get the reassurance of knowing what your number is. And finally, talk to your MLA about improving government's role. You know, there is an act out there made to protect your children. It's called the Radon Awareness Act, Bill 209. Check back on the Sundre Roundup in October 29th, 2019, and Simon Ducatel had an excellent article on that. That bill has been approved. It just needs to get final vetting to become law. And what it means to do is to make sure that every daycare, our children therefore, are protected by mandatory testing, and it's a simple thing for them to do as well. And then the last slide, Joy, is more information. So this is a list of all of the sites. There's lots of government sites: Health Canada, Alberta Lung, Canadian Cancer, Canadian Association of Radon Scientists, Take Action on Radon. Mike Holmes has a public service announcement. Evict Radon, which is the team out of the University of Calgary. TEDx talk by Aaron Godarcy, who leads that team out of Calgary. And finally, my own website. But by all means, there are tons of data on this thing, and I would advise you start with Health Canada or the Canadian Cancer Society. And I know the libraries also have some information available as well, so feel free to drop into your local library and applaud your champions. That's all I have, Joy. What have you got?
Just a little bit more about the 100 Test Challenge. So we are running, Sundre Libraries coordinating that for our community. We will be gearing up all through September, getting information out there about getting people aware and how they can get tested. We will have 100 testers available. So call the library if you're interested in getting up. It's a very, very small time commitment. There will be time set up for you to pick up the testers. And then, like John said, you just open them, stick them somewhere, and leave them for 90 days. So it is the most effective testing, and it's so simple. And then you bring them back, we send them off for you, and you get your results. We don't see any specific results. All we'll get is a summary for what kind of levels there were in the community, but we don't get anything specific. This is the third year that the 100 Test Challenge has been going on. The first year, there was one Alberta community that was represented. It was Spruce Grove. There was none last year. This is the third year, and Sundre and Black Diamond have an opportunity to participate. So we are very fortunate to have this opportunity out here, knowing that there are so many similarities to other areas with high radon. It's a great opportunity to get tested and to provide the information that the radon testing organization bodies need to be able to make some meaningful change for that in our community. So get tested. If you happen to miss that opportunity and you can't participate in the 100 Test Challenge, or if we're all full up, for example, you can still get the loaners from any Parkland Regional Library. Sundre Library has them. They're available through Parkland, and they are good. We'll give you an idea if you have high levels or not. So that's a start, and that's completely free as well with your library card. And library cards are free with most Parkland libraries anyway, so it's completely free. So we do encourage you to get tested. That is the only way you're going to know. Because the 100-day testing challenge is 100 days, we are going to follow up with a part 2 presentation closer to the end of when that 100 days will be up. And we're going to talk about mitigation. So what to do if you find out you do have high levels, how to go about fixing that. So that will be part 2 with John, and we will get some information out on when that's available and when we're going to do that. And if you have more questions, please direct them to the library, and we can make sure that we get them answered for you as well. So to contact the library, you can go to our website or call 638-4000, and we're happy to talk to you about the 100 Test Challenge. Thank you, John, for joining us again. We've done presentations with you before, and they're always informative, so thank you very much. And until then, I guess we'll see you later. Don't forget to get tested.
Okay. Thanks so much.